All right, I think we should be ready to get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming to Progressive Maryland's Fair Election Town Hall. First, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Dwyer, our Deputy Director here at Progressive Maryland. She's going to introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into the presentation.
All right, thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, like Jesse said, my name is Jennifer Dwyer. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at Progressive Maryland. My co-host for the evening is Jesse Noviello, who is Progressive Maryland's Southern Maryland Regional Organizer. We are joined this evening by some truly amazing guests who we are all really excited to work with us to help get big money out of our local politics. First up, I'm so happy to have my own awesome state senator, Sarah Elfreth, joining us tonight. She represents District 30, which is Annapolis in South County. Next up, we also have Lisa Rodvien, who is a county councilwoman representing District 6, serving the Annapolis and Sherwood Forest and Crownsville area. And she's also a Progressive Maryland endorsed candidate. So we're very, very excited to have her here. And also joining us tonight, straight from the County Executive's office, we have Pete Barron, who is Executive Pittman's Director of Government Relations. He has 20 years of experience in Maryland local, state, and government politics, 3 or so of which, might I add, were with Progressive Maryland as a canvass director way back in the day before he went on to do great work with a number of other organizations and candidates. So let's all give a warm, warm welcome to all of our speakers tonight. We are so thankful that they have taken their time to be with us. And with that, I will kick it back over to Jesse.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Jen. So first up, I am going to share my screen in just a sec and introduce our topic for tonight. But before I get into that, I do want to let folks know how the chat and questions work. So you should be able to see a chat button down at the bottom, and you can send a message to all panelists, which all of the panelists will see, the people we introduced, and myself and Jen. So if you want to ask us a question, that's one way to do it. You can also put something to all panelists and attendees. So if you just want to comment on something, if you want to have discussion with the other attendees, that's how you do that. There is also a question and answer box that is separate from the chat where you can put questions that you really want answered. We'll try and get to questions sent to us in the chat, but a lot of times the chat is very active, especially as it gets further into it and we have more people on. So you can use the Q&A as another thing. And structurally, we will be going over some of the material here about fair elections, and each of our speakers will introduce a segment, but we will have probably about 20 minutes at the end to do questions and answers, and we definitely want to answer any questions you guys have. So with that, I will jump into it. So welcome, as mentioned, to Progressive Maryland's Anne Arundel County Fair Elections Town Hall. So I first want to talk about, we call this the Fair Election Town Hall, and I want to talk a little bit about what makes an election unfair, and then what we're going to be talking about tonight and what we're going to be trying to solve tonight. So there are a ton of things that unfortunately we have seen that make elections less fair, less democratic, less representative, and that means our government as a whole is less representative. We've seen voter suppression, from voter ID laws in certain states to closing down polling locations, particularly closing polling locations in certain areas where there may be, a lot of Black voters or a lot of low-income voters who certain politicians are trying to stop from voting. We've, of course, seen gerrymandering, and here in Maryland, we are a very gerrymandered state, especially at the congressional level. Our districts are kind of all over the place. They're not drawn necessarily to be concrete communities, and we've seen gerrymandering in other states and at other levels of government as well that has really made it incredibly unrepresentative, like in Wisconsin, where at the state legislative level, Democrats won more votes in 2018, but Republicans control the legislature there. There can also be problems with first past the post voting, where you have 3 candidates running and one is sort of a spoiler candidate, pulling votes away from others, and you have a winning candidate without a majority of the vote. There's also just poor election administration, where you just don't have enough staff or enough locations, or you are very late on getting ballots printed for mail-in balloting. And many of those things may not be, done intentionally, but they happen. And then finally, you have campaign finance and the fact that candidates who run for office spend a lot of time raising money from wealthy donors. And every year, more and more money is spent on elections, and you have to raise more and more to be a competitive candidate, even at the state and local level. And that means spending time raising money from primarily wealthy folks, as well as corporate PACs, and other things like that, which is not your voter base. Your donor base and your voter base are often very different. And so that is the main issue we are going to be talking about today. You're certainly welcome to ask questions at the end about some of these other issues, especially within the state of Maryland. But the main thing our fair election proposal is targeting at solving is our campaign finance system. So again, today's focus is on campaign finance, and we're focused on Anne Arundel County. The main proposal that Jen, our Deputy Director, is going to walk folks through is a Anne Arundel County proposal, and it's similar to proposals that have been implemented in some other counties already in Maryland. But we'll also touch on the state level and similar state level reforms, and I know Senator Elfreth is going to go into that later on the call. But we're not going to touch as much on federal level reforms or reforms in other states, even though I know those are definitely hot button issues today. So I want to talk a little bit more in depth about what about our current system of campaign finance and the way candidates raise money when they're running for office is unfair and fundamentally undemocratic. So one of the biggest things is that candidates, including incumbents who are currently office holders, spend a lot of time talking to donors, and most of their donors are not their constituents. Now that is bad for a number of reasons. One, just who you talk to, who you spend your time with, has a huge influence on your worldview, how you're thinking about things in a broad way. And so if you're spending hours calling people who are out of state and who are much wealthier than your average constituent and talking to them and asking them for money, that is going to sway the way you think about things and the way you approach things. It's also just a huge waste of time that candidates could be spending talking to their constituents, writing policy, all sorts of other things we expect people to do. And that's especially big for incumbents, because most people running for office, or at least many people running for office, are incumbents, are currently in office, while at the same time they're raising money and campaigning for re-election or election to higher office. So they spend a huge amount of time on that could be used more productively. And again, it's not as productive as it could be because it's all speaking to people, or at least largely speaking to people who are not their constituents and not at all representative of their constituents. And it can push office holders to back away from pushing legislation that is unpopular with donors. We actually see there's a much bigger effect in terms of legislation that doesn't get passed being stuff that donors are in some ways influencing to block than stuff that does get passed. It's very hard. We've really struggled at the federal level to regulate drug prices, and healthcare reform is always a huge issue. And it's because there are so many wealthy interests and corporate PACs that are heavily invested in those issues and do not want to see regulations that can impact their bottom line. And then another big and often under-discussed issue with the current system is that candidates who may be great candidates and great office holders who come from working class backgrounds often struggle to raise funds under our current system. And we see women and people of color also tend to report finding fundraising more difficult and to be a barrier to running for office. Because fundamentally, if you're not able to raise at least enough money to get your name out there, get your message out there, it doesn't matter how good or bad of a candidate you are or how in tune with your constituents you are, you're just not going to be able to win because no one will have heard of you. And that happens even at the county level here. When you're running for county executive or county council, you still need to have some sort of campaign resources to get your name out there. And candidates who come from a working class background, they don't have, 15 people on speed dial who they can call and get $1,000 from each of them. And so they really struggle with that fundraising because initial fundraising for a lot of candidates is through talking to their direct network, the people they know, people they went to school with, went to college with, people they work with. So you see, a lot of lawyers running for office, in part because they often just have a wealthier network because they know other lawyers. And you see this with business people and even some realtors and other sorts of professional class candidates are much more able to raise the funds than working people. And of course, the very wealthy, not only do they know other very wealthy people, they can often self-fund. So it's not a barrier at all to folks like them. So that's sort of the state of things now under our current system. Obviously, there's more details I could go into on why this is a problem. But I think most of you probably are coming into this meeting understanding a lot of these issues. Our current campaign finance system is not something a lot of people like or defend or think is good. We can all see how it can be corrupting. So I'm going to pass it over to Jen Dwyer again, our Deputy Director, to talk a little bit about the solution.
Thanks, Jesse. So a big solution that we could bring to Anne Arundel County that could be really helpful for reducing the influence of big money and special interests in our local elections is a fair election fund. So what a fair election fund is a program that empowers candidates to run for office without having to go after these big donations from like rich people and corporations. Once a candidate shows a serious level of support from everyday voters by receiving a certain number of small donations and also agrees not to accept contributions over a specific amount, usually around between $150 and $250, they qualify to have those small donations matched from a county fund at rates from a 1-to-1 match all the way up to a 7-to-1 match or even higher, with the smallest donations matched at the highest rate. So what that all comes out to is, you're running for office, you knock on somebody's door, you ask for their vote, and then you also ask them for $10. And then that $10 gets matched by another 70, 80, $90 from the county fund. So in that way, you're actually able to raise enough money so that you can run a successful campaign. And the person who's voting for you, they're more likely to give you $10 if they feel like it's going to mean something to you. So if they're saying, hey, this $10 is actually worth $100 to you, like, sure, it makes it a lot easier to engage folks as grassroots donors, and it helps with getting folks like really invested in your campaign, and then also in our democracy, in our local government and politics stuff in general. So why does it matter to raise money in this way? It's better for our democracy because it means that, like Jesse was saying, more people that have just a call to service and really good ideas are empowered to run for office, regardless of how much money they personally happen to have or how well connected they are to powers that be and people with money and all that kind of stuff. It means that the people that are true leaders within our communities, so the rock star PTA mom who just never misses a beat and raises all this money for all the schools and great things with kids, and your superstar civic association president who just keeps everybody in the know on what's going on in the community. Those are the folks that are able to run using this kind of program. They're well known in the community. People know them and support them, and want them to be elected leaders. So it also reduces the influence of corporations, which I'm sure this is surprising to no one, but corporations are not people. So when they they're out there to make money, and when they're contributing to different people, they seem to think that it's going to be good for them in some type of way somewhere along the line. And so that's really just not a good thing for everyday voters. It's the voices of everyday voters and people that live in the area. Those should be the people whose voices are lifted up and most important in how our government works. So we are looking to create this program at the county level for county executive and county council seats. And how the program would be created would be voters would need to approve it through a referendum. So, on all our ballots that we're all filling out or getting ready to fill out, where it's, question A, B, C, something, there would be, a question A, vote yeah, or to establish a fair elections fund, something like that. So it would be, you vote for it at that point. Once the voters authorize it, then the county council would put together some legislation to design the program and come up with the specifics of how it would work. So to look at an example of two sample candidates. So candidate A, who raises money in a traditional way, they're going to spend more time contacting donors who can give larger amounts because it's really expensive to run these races. I know Senator Elfreth raised crazy amount of $300,000. She's really good at raising a lot of money, but it's hard and it's super time consuming. So, unfortunately, because we don't have this fair election system yet, people, whether they want to or not, have to run under what we have right now, which is, the traditional fundraising kind of methods. And so, if you have, on the one hand, someone who has to spend more time talking to donors that can give large amounts under a fair election system, that same candidate or someone who wanted to use the fair election system could spend more time just talking to everyday county residents and asking them for their vote and asking them for a donation at the same time. Traditional candidates running under traditional fundraising tend to have higher average contributions. So what that could turn into for some people is them prioritizing time or contact with the people that can write the $500 checks or the $1,000 checks compared to the folks that are giving 10 or 25 bucks. Now with a fair election, a candidate using a fair elections program, the average donations will be much smaller and everybody's voice is about equal because it's, the amounts, there isn't a huge discrepancy in the amount of money that they're getting between one person and another, especially once you add in those matching funds. Candidates that run traditionally too, a lot of times they'll have to take corporate money or money from PACs, money from special interest groups, whereas a group running under fair elections programs, they don't take money that way. So there's no, group that's, going to try and ask for something later or, perhaps pressure an elected official in a way that's not appropriate and not how government should work, on the back end later. So then on the next slide, we have, what do we have on the next slide, Jesse? The matching system. Okay, so this is an example of how the public financing program in Prince George's County works. So there are already in existence public financing programs in Prince George's, Montgomery, Howard, Baltimore City, and then there's one on the referendum this year in Baltimore County that we're hoping is going to pass. So in Prince George's County, the way it works is for the first $25 that a candidate gets from somebody, it's matched 7-1. So what that means is you give a candidate $25, but it's actually worth $200 to them because it'll get matched by another $175 out of this county fund. And then the match rates go down a little bit from there. So for the next $25 or the next $50 after that, it gets matched 5-1. So if you gave $50, it's actually worth $350. So it kind of, it's a pretty good deal. You get a pretty, big bang for your buck when you're giving these like relatively small donations. And, I'm thinking, man, if somebody asked me to give $25 and I knew it was worth that much to them, like I would feel more incentivized to give, I think. And then as you go up to like the higher dollar amounts, it gets matched yet at the lower rates of, 1-1. So that way, the smaller donations are just incentivized a little bit more. And the voices of people that like can't just give $50 or can't give $100, their voices are really uplifted in a way that they aren't in traditional fundraising systems. Okay, next slide. Thanks. So we are really excited about the potential of bringing this program to Anne Arundel County because we know that it works. The program in Montgomery County was approved in, I think, 2014, and it went into its first use in 2018. And all kinds of candidates who are those like true community leaders came out and used this program and were able to run super successful campaigns and win. And on the county council now, 5 out of the 9 people in Montgomery County have used the program, as well as the county executive. Candidates see the program as it's a viable way to win. When this option was on the table in 2018, 31 out of the 49 county council candidates opted into it. So more wanted to raise money this way than didn't. So, obviously it seems like a viable path forward for folks that are actually in the boat of using it, right? And half of the county executive candidates did as well. And, I just want to point out too, it's not just as simple as saying, oh, I want to, run using this program, give me all the free money. You have to actually qualify. And the bar is, it's high enough that you have to really do some work to be able to get into this program. So about 2/3 of the folks that ran for county council and half the county executive candidates ended up qualifying. So yes, this isn't, just anybody can just take whatever money kind of thing. And the candidates who use this program, they raise similar amounts of money to folks who raise money using the more traditional methods. And overall, the program was lauded as a huge success. There's so many stories, if you talk to candidates who use this program, of people saying like, I never saw myself as an elected official. I never could have possibly run for this if it hadn't been for this program being in place. So this is really exciting. This is something we definitely want to see in our county. So here comes the question. How much does it cost? Because it seems like, man, this is probably expensive, right? But it actually isn't that expensive, or as expensive as it would seem. On average, the programs cost about $2 per voter per year. And so doing a little bit of back of the napkin math, I'm thinking a program in Anne Arundel County would cost probably around $800,000 a year, maybe a little less, probably not too much more. Which $800,000 sounds like, oh my God, that sounds like a lot of money, right? That's a lot of zeros. But in the context of the whole annual budget of Anne Arundel County, which is like $1.7 billion, it winds up being like hundreds of a percent. It's like 0.04% of the county's total budget. So if you were trying to put that in the context of, like kind of a middle-class family in Anne Arundel County making, say, $75,000 a year for their household annual income, 0.047% of 75,000 is $35. So it's not no money, but it's something that it's an amount of money that you can find if you set up your priorities in such a way that you prioritize finding that $35 to do whatever it is that you want to do with that $35. And also, I know everybody's like concerned, like, gosh, there's, all this economic turmoil going on now and probably into next year and the year after. This is not something that would take effect even until 2026. So if we pass it in 2022 or something, then it would be first used in 2026, and so it wouldn't start to get funded until 2023 at the earliest. And usually with these programs, counties have the option of, do they want to fund a little bit, put a little bit into the fund each year? Do they want to do it, in 1 or 2 chunks in, say, 2024, 2025? So there's options for how to go about funding it, but it's not something that is going to require funding in like the immediate future. So yeah, so I think that is all that I have to say about that for now. And with that, we'll kick it back over to Jesse to talk about how we can make this awesome program a thing in Anne Arundel County.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jen. So yeah, so that is the program. That's how it works. So how do we actually make it happen? So the biggest thing we are looking for right now is to see the county council pass a charter amendment allowing this program. It would still be voted on by the voters in 2022, but they would pass legislation authorizing that. So in order to get them to do that, one of the best things you can do is you can contact your county council member. And I know Lisa Rodvien, who's one of our county council members, is going to speak a little bit about some of the council's thinking on issues and ways we can influence them. But always hearing from constituents is a huge factor in how they decide what's important and what to vote on. We are also collecting petition signatures right now. I believe, Jen, you have the link for that if you want to drop those in the chat. Yeah, so if you can sign our petition, that will be super helpful. We want to get as many signatures on that as we can, and then we'll send that over to the county council as well. Another big thing is you can just educate others in your life, in your network, because what we found is that once people sort of understand this program, they tend to like it. Most people don't like our current campaign finance system. They're looking for alternatives, but this is not something they've heard of necessarily. It's not as, sort of top of their mind or top of their radar, but it's a really important issue. And we'll be doing some other events like this one throughout the course of the coming months and stuff to try and educate folks. But if you can educate folks in your own life, that is really valuable. And another thing is you can join our Fair Election Task Force. So here in Anne Arundel County, we have a Fair Election Task Force that is working on this issue, made up of, probably around a dozen relatively active members of Progressive Maryland and myself. And we've have, other folks who help out from time to time. And we're really looking to grow that, that number going forward. So you can definitely join our task force and help out. And that's something, whatever level of time commitment or whatnot you have in your life, we're welcome to members who, are like, this is the best thing ever. I want to dedicate my life to this. Or if you're like, I can give you a weekend every month, like, how can I help? Any level, you're welcome to join. And we definitely need a lot of help with educating folks, especially right now with the pandemic. And it's so much harder to reach people in traditional ways. So with that, I am going to pass it next to Lisa Rodvien, the council member from District 6, to talk a little bit about the county council.
Had to make sure I was unmuted. So I'm Lisa Rodvien. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this evening's event. This is something I think is a really important issue to be looking at, even at the local level. You might think of big money as something that has this massive effect at the federal level, especially with all the attention that we have on the presidential election, where there's just, I mean, the amount of money going around in the presidential elections right now is just astonishing. And even some of the, the Senate elections and the House elections, they just have huge amounts of money. But the influence of money, I think, can be real at the local level as well. And I think actually this in a way became a campaign issue in 2020 for the county elections because there was such a noticeable rapid pace of development in the county. And, new buildings in places of the county that people felt like, oh, we already have enough built up around here. We don't need another shopping center. We don't need another, neighborhood. We don't need another, whatever kind of building. And, Anne Arundel County, I'm guessing all of you are living here, know that it's a wonderful place to live. And so our land is in demand for developers who want to, take land that hasn't been developed and sell it for residential, commercial, whatever kind of purpose, and they'll make a pretty penny doing it. So I think this issue came up, as a pretty major issue in 2018 in both the county council elections and in the county executives election. And so the reason that I'm talking so much about development is because the idea that development was having this influence because it was so much in the pockets of government leaders, because it had, it was such a large contributor to different candidates and different elected officials that at very least the appearance, and, I don't know the deep down dirt on what may or may not have been happening in a previous administration, but at very least the appearance made people very concerned about the pressure that developers were able to put on elected officials that to allow this rapid pace of development that I think was very concerning to a lot of residents. And so in terms of how do you go about being a good advocate for this issue? Well, I think you have to start out by knowing where in the past, where has large money, I'm just going to call it big money, even though it's, local big money, whatever that big money is, how has it been able to influence what the government is doing, what the local government is doing? Or where is there a perception that big money is playing a role in what local government is doing? And once you can find that out, then you can sort of look to interest groups. And I just, again, going back to Anne Arundel County example, groups that are interested in slowing down development, groups that are interested in environmental issues, groups that are interested in maintaining, lots of land in sort of a natural state, people that are concerned about development for the sake of the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And you're going to find your allies. So I think it's really important to start, figuring out who are your allies, build your network, build your team, and think of who else would support this. And because I think development has been probably the biggest, at least perceived influence of big money in local government, you're going to look and say, okay, well, who is concerned about overdevelopment? And then you're going to find your allies. Once you find your allies, once you figure out, okay, who does this matter to? You need to reach out to your elected officials. And you maybe need to be strategic about who reaches out to your elected officials. In the county government, I think you have, probably 4 solid votes among the Democrats on the council. Of course, I cannot speak for any of my colleagues with certainty. This is not something we're talking about because it's really, everything sort of, any conversation about this really sort of got kicked back significantly in time because of COVID. We've just been so focused on, having to completely rearrange the budget, making sure that we're making wise decisions about, allowing the health department and the county executive to go forward with, doing the things that they need to do to keep people in Anne Arundel County safe with the pandemic growing. So, anyway, just make it clear that I don't have, immediate firsthand knowledge of my colleagues, but I do get the impression from at least older knowledge that there's general support among the 4 Democrats. Now, you may have recalled that Jesse mentioned that in order to get a charter question on the ballot, you have to have a resolution passed by the county council that has 5 votes. So I said we have 4 likely votes, but we need 5. The current county council is made up of 4 Democratic members and 3 Republican members. And I really don't have any idea if my Republican colleagues support this at all, but that's not to say that they wouldn't. So you have to think, okay, well, which of those groups are they, eager to support? Are they eager to support, or they want to make sure that they have the continued support of an environmental group? Are they wanting to make sure that they have the continued support of an anti-development group? And maybe those are the people you want to reach out to, to those particular council members, those members that maybe you don't have the same certainty, and say, hey, we'd like to make sure that we're not allowing this type of big money to influence our elections. So knowing who your allies are, knowing who is likely to make the best case for each of the members of the council. And then, once you can get to the point of having something, having a concrete bill ready to be introduced, that's when it can be very powerful to, in any way possible, personal messages, anyone that has personal stories. You lived in a neighborhood and, thanks to the developer's influence, your neighborhood now has, which used to back up to woods, now backs up to the backside of a shopping center where you listen to, a loading dock all night or something like that. And those kind of stories can be very compelling. So the personal stories, I think, can be among the most valuable thing that you can share with your legislator. In terms of, I'll just say we get on a lot of bills that get a lot of public attention. We get the form emails, and they have some value, but not nearly the value of a personal message that says, this is how this issue has impacted me. Or, for this one, it could be something like, I know someone who would be a fantastic candidate, but because of, their, financial situation, there's just no feasible way to get this person on the ballot. So that could be another angle. To say, look, here's what Anne Arundel County is missing out on because we don't have this. And I'll just tell you from, I think Pete Bear and Sarah, Senator Elfreth, and I all have experience with the fundraising side of campaigning, and it's not really very fun. I mean, it's not anything anyone looks forward to. In fact, I would say that for my own personal campaign, I disliked it so much that rather than, I probably should have done more fundraising, but instead of doing that, I just did a lot of things myself. I served as my own campaign manager. I was my own graphic designer. I worked directly with my printers. I mean, I just did everything myself, which I really don't want to do again because it's exhausting. And, the same, just like Jesse was saying, time that I wasn't spending, okay, maybe I wasn't spending time on the phone asking for donations, but I was spending time in front of my computer and talking to vendors about, different campaign material, rather than talking to my hopefully future constituents and the people that lived in my district. Although I did a lot of that too. And that, that can, and I know both Senator Elfreth and Pete on behalf of our county executive did a lot of that as well. So that can, that can make up some of your game. But when it comes down to it, mailers are expensive. Television ads are really expensive. Radio ads, to newspaper ads, that stuff, that information, that material that gets you out there, gets your message out there, costs a lot of money. So you can't, you can do things on a shoestring as much as possible, but you still have to have something. And, to the extent that you can make that point to say, here are the candidates that we are missing out on. I know some amazing people that really, they're already a community leader and they would be a natural person to run for office. but they just, the feasibility is not good for that person. I will say my one area that allowed me to is my kids are grown, so I don't have young children at home. I have a full-time job, but I have this little window of, okay, I have a full-time job, but I don't have my own kids that I have to raise. So I have that time that other people are spending raising their kids, where I was doing things like, all right, let's gonna make a pretty little mailer here, or let's make a door hanger or whatever. So, there are fantastic parents out there, and we need all voices in legislature. We need, people with all different backgrounds. And so the ability to tell individual personal stories, figuring out who is also part of this possible network, who else is negatively influenced by big money, that especially if they're already organized, if they're already existing organizations, if you can tap into their organizational networks and say, okay, these are organizations that already have a relationship with this council person. And if we can connect them, if they're already connected on other issues, how do we connect them on this issue as well? So I would say those are probably my two biggest pieces of advice. Figure out who your allies are and tell personal stories. And I'm happy to answer questions. I'm not following the chat at all. So if there's anything I can answer, I'm happy to participate that. But I know my colleagues in the county executives and the state senate also I'm sure have plenty to say on this topic, because I know none of us are looking forward to that part of 2022.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Councilwoman Rodvien. We're going to move next to Senator Sarah Elfreth.
Well, thank you so much, Jesse and Jen and Progressive Maryland, for having me on tonight. I have the privilege of representing you if you live in District 30. That's the city of Annapolis, the surrounding suburbs, and then everything south in Anne Arundel County, right up until the Calvert County line. It's quite a large district, and I experienced that firsthand while running in my campaign. So I represent you in the state senate. I serve on the Budget and Taxation Committee, on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and most recently I spend a significant amount of my time serving on the Senate President's work group on equity and inclusion, looking at ways that we can make a more inclusive government. So this is a really important issue, and as the county councilwoman said, we know that firsthand. And it's one of those issues that is best tackled at the local, the state, and the federal level. It's going to take all of us kind of coordinating our efforts to make sure that we can do this effectively. So I'm here to talk a little bit about state policy. So 14 other states have some type of public financing laws. Maryland's Public Financing Act was passed in 1974. And it was funny, I was trying to Google the date it was established, and it turns out I had to phone a friend for that because Google was not of help. But we've had it, it's so ingrained in our system. It was first passed in 1974. Most recently, it was popularly utilized by Governor Hogan in his 2014 race. And it works pretty simply. It's a seed money concept where equal to 10% of an expenditure limit for eligible tickets. For both a primary is one thing, and then a general election is another thing. So in 2018, for instance, the limit of an expenditure for a total campaign was $2.8 million. So that meant that a candidate, to be eligible for that seed money, needed to have raised $279,000 in increments of $250 or less per individual donor. There's currently $3.5 million left in that fund. And most importantly, that fund is only currently available to the governor and lieutenant governor tickets. I was brought on to talk about two recent state bills that unfortunately did not pass. And I'll talk about maybe why that happened in a little bit, but just to give you the broad strokes of this, Senate Bill 613 would expand the Public Financing Act to include both the Attorney General and the Comptroller, so our statewide elected constitutional officers in the state. The fiscal note on that bill was $8.5 million. Senate Bill 947 would have expanded the PFA to include candidates for state senator and candidates for delegate, and that had a fiscal note of $45 million. And I'm here to tell you, as someone who sits on the budget committee and just got a nice preview of our future budget challenges thanks to the pandemic, funding is always a hindrance, and we need to figure out our way around that. I'm going to drop in the chat a way that you can look up your own legislators if you don't know the folks who represent you in the House and the Senate. I also do want to touch on a piece of legislation that we worked on at the state level on behalf of Anne Arundel County. I had the privilege of running with the county executive and the county councilwoman as a team in 2018. And this county executive, and I think Pete's going to touch on this, but is particularly passionate about getting money out of politics when it comes to issues that are directly before the county council and the county executive. For instance, in the Maryland General Assembly, we cannot fundraise during the legislative session. It's rather unseemly for us to be able to take checks when we're directly voting on bills. So we have that 3 months that, and we all love that. We don't have to pick up the phone and ask for money during those 3 months. We're busy doing other things. But that's not so at the county level, and certainly not so with certain limitations when it comes to people having business before the county. So we passed statewide legislation, local enabling legislation to allow the Anne Arundel County to kind of figure out what was best for Anne Arundel County. Not every county is alike. Prince George's County had a similar challenge. Pete probably knows better than I do, a couple of years ago with developers, and banned developer contributions from their county offices as well. So we were able to accomplish that last year, and really looking forward to what the county executive and the county council put together in terms of taking that kind of money out of politics. I do want to emphasize, I think the councilman talked about it and Jesse mentioned it, it's the harsh truth of politics that it does take money to be able to talk to voters. That is what I spent my money on. I was fortunate that I was able to raise a significant amount of money, but all of that went directly to mail. All of it went directly to radio ads, television ads, trying to get my message out, trying to, at the end of the day, convince people to participate. We're fortunately going to have an overwhelming a number of people participating in this presidential election, hopefully 85% or more here in Maryland, but that's not so in our state elections. We're really lucky if we can turn out 65%. And so a lot of our money goes to convincing people to vote in an off presidential election. I was also in a position, I was 28 years old when I started running for office, and I had worked for nonprofits my whole career. So I was not in a position where I could have lent myself money. And some candidates they can lend themselves tens of thousands of dollars. And no shade to that. It's part of this. It takes money to get your message out, but that was not my case. So I had to focus on running a truly grassroots campaign that started in people's living rooms. I knocked on 20,000 doors to go talk to folks. I probably knocked on some of your doors. I actually saw some neighbors in the chat. And just try to engage as many coalition partners as possible. And we had a fantastic team doing that. We would have 115 volunteers every single Saturday morning towards the end of that campaign, going out and talking to voters. And that's what campaigns are all about. And a significant amount of our campaign money went to buying donuts and coffee and pizzas to thank volunteers. But my point here is when I'm not wearing my senator hat, I teach political science and public policy to undergraduates. And we're focused very much right now on how essential participation is to our government. And that it just is not going to function without us, every single one of us participating. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we are 1 week out. Hopefully this time next week, we'll all be waiting with bated breath for polls to close at 8 o'clock and wait for the results. So I hope, if we want to really get money out of politics, that everybody spends some time this week making phone calls, knocking on doors. I'm going up to Pennsylvania on Saturday to knock on doors for the Biden campaign, to talk directly to voters. And that's not going to cost the campaign any money. That's me as a volunteer volunteering my Saturday to do that. But it's really truly about participation. That's how we're going to get representatives who represent us, by participating in our elections. I do want to, June left a really great question in the chat, and I want to address it. She says she's reluctant to donate money because she's not sure it's being received by the candidate. How can I be sure funds are not being misused? Which is a great question, June. And we have a campaign financing system, and when we're not in off election years, we have to report, and I say we, Lisa and I are on the same schedule. We report every January And it's a very long, detailed report of every single person who gave us money, where they live, if it's above a certain level, what their occupation is, because that's important for people to know. And then exactly how we spent that money, from a $5 Facebook, ad to the, $10 of donuts I'll buy for volunteers. All of that is listed out every single January. And then in an election year, we have to report more frequently, 3 or 4 times in that year alone. So you have more rapid transparency in how we are receiving money and how we are spending that money. So I'll also drop the really cool search function where you can look up any donor, you can look up any candidate, and look at any reports. I'll drop that in the chat box as well. It's really important that we have transparent elections, and it's actually something, if you live in the city of Annapolis, we've been trying to work on to make them have a searchable, accessible, transparent campaign finance system as well, because we deserve to know as voters just who is funding elections. So with that, I'll stop talking and answer any questions folks may have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Senator Elfreth. We're going to hear from Pete Barron next to close us out. And then we are running a little long, but hopefully panelists can stick around for a few minutes after 8 if necessary, if folks have more questions. But Pete, take it away.
Thanks, Jesse, Jennifer. It's good to be here with Progressive Maryland. As Jennifer mentioned, I actually got my start in Maryland politics with Progressive Maryland. We were working as a canvas director in 2002, 2003, 2004, I think. Could be, maybe I was there for 2005 too. And we were working on issues of like living wage, healthcare, and there was an issue that we were working on, clean money for elections. It's one of these issues that has been going on, and as Councilwoman Rodvien and Senator Elfreth were speaking, and Jesse and Jennifer, you guys were talking about this, I was coming to think about something. So in the county bills, so we have a Montgomery County law that is the only local clean money system that has actually been through an election. There are several counties that have now put them in place, but Montgomery County is the first one that has tested it. And that actually came from a state bill. It needed state enabling legislation. It was HB 1499 in 2013. I remember that bill well. It was my responsibility in a previous job to help shepherd that bill through. And it was a big campaign finance reform package. And in it, we included enabling for local jurisdictions to implement their own campaign public financing systems. And then there's other reasons why you need to go to the charter that I won't bore you with, or to the voters for a charter. But the thing that I was reminded of on that is, while we were working on that bill, there'll be bills that we would also be working on, right, related to a healthcare issue, or Senator Elfreth knows all about environmental bills, right? And there's a whole bunch of environmental stuff we're working on. Councilwoman Rodvien is a teacher and is particularly interested in and has a great knowledge on education issues, right? And so you go through it and you'll talk to a legislator, and they'll refer back to, well, I'm going to trust Councilwoman Rodvien on this. She knows what our schools, she was able to explain to me what our schools needed. Or Senator Elfreth, she really knows about those oysters and all about that, right? Every single person that you will need to get a vote on it is an expert on this subject matter. Every single one of them has to do campaign finance. And so it makes it a particularly challenging as you're trying to advocate for it, because unlike an oyster bill, right? I know they're tasty, but I don't know what it takes to grow them, to protect their habitat. And I'm going to rely on experts. On this, I'm an expert. I know what it takes. And yeah, this system I'm going to know more about it. So that makes it, I think, more challenging for the advocacy side of it. And I'll say one other thing. This is a popular issue though. So when you peel it back and you go to the voters, it is. The community college in Anne Arundel County does a survey every 6 months, and there was a survey, we had a question in it in the April 2020 survey, I think, and it showed that this issue was more popular. I think 41% of folks were strongly in favor of it. It wasn't quite 50%. There was a big undecided population. I think a third of the voters were saying, I don't really know what that is. And that comes to sort of, I think what Jennifer and Jesse were talking about in the beginning, is there's a lot of education that needs to be done on this issue. And not just with in the General Assembly, the 188 campaign finance experts or the 7 in the county council, but regular voters understand that the system doesn't work, but this idea is kind of novel. So the way Jesse broke it down with, this is the match and that, it's very easy for a voter's eyes to glaze over when you start thinking of my first 50 is worth 150, but my second 50 is worth So that is critical for the system to work, because if that doesn't work, nobody's going to use it. But distilling a message that voters can understand about why clean money is important, why public financing works, and why it helps reduce special interest influence are critical messages to take home. Senator Elfreth referenced something my boss, County Executive Stuart Pittman, is very passionate about, and that's developer contributions in campaigns. Councilwoman Rodvien referenced real world examples of that. And, County Executive Pittman does not take developer contributions. If there's a developer that is building in Anne Arundel County, he will not take their contributions. And I know from firsthand conversations with him and his fundraiser that they get offered money all the time from developers, and it's easy money, right? It's, hey, we'll cut you a big check and you can take it, and they will not accept it or return it if it comes in and is discovered that the donor has an active project in the county. And there's real examples of the harm that this has caused in our county. I won't name the development or the developer, but Councilwoman Rodvien sort of danced around that the previous administration, she wouldn't speak to it. I will. They were explicit in their sort of pay for play structure, where there is actual evidence that a developer made the right number of contributions, and a development that was age restricted, so 55 and older, was then transitioned to a open, any come one, come all development, which it didn't just have implications for, the destruction of the environment. I mean, that was happening. They were building a development there, but it had real impact on school capacity. And so now the taxpayers of the county are subsidizing school capacity, and eventually, there's this myth that development will pay for itself, and it doesn't end up working out that way. With that, I won't harp on that too much, but I really do appreciate the work that Progressive Maryland is doing. Like I said, I came out of this. I know how hard work it is to get people organized, but this is the best way to make change. I've seen it time and time again in my career, and you did date me, Jennifer. I have been around for a little while on advocacy, working with labor unions, working with some healthcare industry, and then also for some politicians. But have always had a foot in the campaign world as well, and I do know how hard it is to make a campaign work on a shoestring budget or on a publicly financed system. And the key lesson out of Montgomery County, I think, is that a system like this can work for everybody. The voters and the taxpayers of that community, most of all. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have. And I know I talked a little longer than I said I would.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, so thank you to all of the panelists. If folks do still have questions, we would definitely love to answer any of them. So feel free and put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat. But yeah, no, I do want to thank again all the panelists and all the attendees as well. You know, it's easy right now to not get involved, not try and learn about any of these issues. There's so many short-term struggles people are facing right now in particular. And of course, the failures within our democratic system on all fronts do make those issues worse. But I want to stress again, getting involved, educating others is really important. So go back to that slide, contact your county council member, sign our petition, educate others, and join our Fair Election Task Force. We definitely have a lot of work to do, but this is definitely an issue where we can make change and really have a substantial impact on all the other issues that come before our county government and eventually our state government as well. All right, so I'm not seeing any new questions. So thank you again to all of the attendees, all of the panelists, and it is past 8 o'clock, so we will call it a night. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Hi, Ellie.
Thanks, everyone.
She voted too. Right on, girl.
Thank you.